Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the July 17th meeting of the Lower Providence Township Board of Supervisors. If you could please all rise and join me and recite the pledge. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Deb, could you please call the roll?
Absolutely. Mrs. Ekman.
Here.
Mr. Sergini.
Here.
Mr. Duffy.
Here.
Mr. Thomas.
Here.
Mrs. Zimmerman.
Here. Thank you. Before our meeting tonight, we held an exec session and we discussed legal and personnel matters. And with that, we'll begin. Item 1 on the agenda is the consent agenda. And if we could have a motion to entertain the acceptance of the consent agenda.
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Do we have any questions from board members? Questions from the audience on the consent agenda? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All those in favor, consent by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carried. Item 2 this evening is a conditional use hearing. We'll start off with item 2A. We have to have an appointment of our special counsel, which is Mr. Paul Logan, which is here in front of the room. And our solicitor, John Rice, is also going to assist with the hearing. But first, we need a motion to accept the appointment of Mr. Logan.
I make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any questions? Any questions from the audience of the appointment? All those in favor, consent by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Motion carried. Okay, thank you. Okay. So with that, we'll go into the conditional use hearing. Can I have a motion to enter into the hearing, please?
Motion?
Thank you, Jill. We have a motion. Do you have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any questions? Questions from the audience? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All those in favor, consent by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carried. Okay, we're in a hearing.
Okay. The applicant's here. Bernadette Kearney is representing the applicant for this conditional use hearing. I'll go through generally what we're going to do tonight with this conditional use hearing. Mr. Logan's representing the township, and the board up here is basically sitting as judges like a zoning hearing board would sit on a zoning hearing board case. The conditional use that's in front of the board tonight involves a modification of a prior conditional use decision which a prior Board of Supervisors approved back in 1998. The initial conditional use decision, which approved the Shannondale development and all of the phases, goes back to 1998. The actual construction didn't occur until about 3 or 4 years later after they went through land development. In 1998, that conditional use decision had a requirement in it, condition number 4, and I think the applicant is spelled out in the application. Condition number 4 required from 1998 that there be a public road put through that property. It wasn't specifically designated on the plans at the time, but there was to be a public thoroughfare through the property from Egypt to Park. A lot's changed in the last 16 years in Lower Providence Township, including some traffic patterns, and I think we're going to hear from at least 2 traffic engineers here tonight who will explain why the request is in front of this board. The request is pretty simple from the landowner is to modify the 1998 conditional use application to change the designation of that road from a public road to a private road. The proposal is simply that. And we're going to hear some testimony, as I said, for each. There's also a parallel land development plan, which is in front of the township, which will come before this board sometime next month, involving the last two buildings in the Meadows part of that project. There's 3 skilled care buildings that were approved initially, and one of them's been built, and there's a land development plan which will come, it's been to the Planning Commission, will come to this board. So if you hear some discussion about the Meadows development, that's what triggered this road request. The Planning Commission's reviewed this and I believe has recommended approval. The one thing I want to do before Ms. Kearney starts with her presentation is just mark a couple board exhibits. I'm going to mark as a board exhibit B1 the June 16th, 2014 conditional use application by the applicant. And that'll be marked as B1. I'm going to mark as B2 the original October 15th, 1998 conditional use decision by Lower Providence Township. It was an approval for Audubon land development / senior campus living, AKA Heritage Village, for conditional use. So that'll be marked as B2. These documents are all on file with the township and have been on file with the township. And B3, I'm going to mark the Montgomery County Planning Commission review letter, which the township received. I'll mark that as B3, and that has a date of June 20th, 2014. So there'll be board exhibits. The way this hearing is going to work, Ms. Kearney will present witnesses. Mr. Logan can ask questions on cross-examination. The supervisors can ask questions of the witnesses. And then once Ms. Kearney's done with her presentation, Mr. Logan can call witnesses if he chooses. Same procedure. This is a hearing. It's an administrative hearing, but it'll be run like any other type of court proceeding. At the end of all the live testimony, there'll be a public comment period. The one question I wanted to ask, is there anybody here that wants to present any testimony or evidence other than the landowner and the township? Seeing none? As I said, once the testimony's done, the sworn testimony, there'll be a public comment period for anybody that wants to give their opinion on the application, hopefully, and any of the testimony that you've heard, and then the board may be in a position to vote at that time. So, does the board have any questions? Ready to proceed on this? Okay, Ms. Kearney?
Good evening, Bernadette Kearney from Hamburg Rubin. I'm going to hand out an exhibit package booklet that I have made up. And at the end of the hearing, if you no longer want it, I will take it and recycle it. And as you'll see in the exhibit package, the table of contents, I also marked as Exhibit 1 the conditional use order from 1998. And there are a series of exhibits, most of which the township already has in different capacities. The resolution from 1999, plan prepared by Bursage, which is the master plan, which Brad Macy will testify in reference to. The declaration, which was attached to the conditional use application, which indicates that Shannondale Boulevard, as part of the declaration, is a common element, and then the Board of Assessment information that Shannondale Boulevard, as a common element, got its own tax parcel number. Then you'll see Frank Montgomery from Traffic Planning and Design is going to testify. We have his CV, a series of slides that were presented at the Planning Commission that Frank's going to talk about here also. We have the transportation assessment that he did in March 2014, that the township has reviewed. The response letter he had done on May 21st, also in response to a McMahon review letter. The capacity analysis, which was also attached to the conditional use application. And finally, the last item, something that Frank did a cost estimate just recently. That would be something new that the township may not have seen yet. I believe Casey did get a copy of it probably yesterday, but the rest of the township may not have seen it yet, and Frank will testify in reference to that. So Brad Macy from Audubon Land Development will testify and give an overview of where Shenandoah is. As Mr. Rice explained, we're going to be here in August for Meadows Phase 5.2, and Brad will show you on the master plan what has been constructed, what's in the process of being constructed. And Frank Montgomery from Traffic Planning and Design has been involved with the project for several years, and he'll also testify in reference to those exhibits that we just went through. As Mr. Rice had indicated, we had received a conditional use back in 1998, and when you ask for a modification of a condition of a special exception or a conditional use, you have to show changed circumstances and that make the condition no longer appropriate, and that the grant of relief will not injure the public interest. So Brad and Frank will testify in reference to that, and they're certainly open to questions from the board in reference to their testimony.
Okay, just as a follow-up to that opening, the exhibit book that has just been presented, that'll be marked A1 through A14. Applicant's exhibit A1 through A14, and can provide the court reporter with a list of the exhibits as we go. So, okay, are you ready for your first witness?
Yes.
Mr. Logan, any questions on this? Okay.
And Mr. Rice, what is on the board is a larger version of what is exhibit number 3. Larger, and I think Brad had added a little color to it.
Okay.
Do you want this one? And Brad, could you explain by whom you are employed?
Audubon Land Development.
And just briefly describe what you do for Audubon Land Development?
I coordinate development projects.
Can we just stop for a minute, because we're going to need a mic,
Yeah.
and it may be easier if Brad's at the podium
And yep.
and Bernadette, if you don't, you get to walk around with the mic. Thank you.
And Brad, is Audubon Land Development the developer who has been developing Shenandoah in phases?
Yes,
And are you a professional land surveyor?
I am.
Okay. And can you describe for the board, Exhibit 1 is the 1998 conditional use order,
That's correct.
and the applicant, as Mr. Rice had indicated, is asking for a modification of condition number 4 in reference to Shenandoah Boulevard in order to allow it to be a private road, correct?
Yes,
And the declaration is an exhibit to the conditional use application, and also part of the package is Exhibit 4.
yes,
And at Article 3.1.1 of the declaration, Shenandoah Boulevard is a common element of that declaration, correct?
correct.
And you can find that on Exhibit 4, page 4, at the very bottom. It indicates that Shenandoah Boulevard is a common element.
Yes,
And Exhibit 5 is the Montgomery County Board of Assessment information for Shenandoah Boulevard, indicating that the parcel number is 430003556001, correct?
that's correct.
And that's the parcel number we indicated on the conditional use application.
Yes,
And Exhibit 2 is the land development approval of a resolution dated December 2nd, 1999.
yes,
And that resolution indicates that Shenandoah will be developed in phases, correct?
Yes.
And on the board and on the plan that you have, which is a colorized version of Exhibit 3, can you explain the phasing that has occurred already and the future phases?
Sure. There are a total of 5 phases. Phase 1 is in the center of the page. Phase 2 is at the bottom right-hand corner. Phase 3 is immediately to the left of Phase 2. Phase 4 is again to the left of Phase 3. And Phase 5 is on the north side of the page, or the top side of the page. Phase 1 was the initial phase of construction. I took the liberty of marking or highlighting in orange the buildings that were constructed as part of Phase 1. So Phase 1 is completely finished. The purple are the roads that were constructed along with that particular phase. Phase 2, again on the bottom right-hand side of the page, I took, again, has 1, 2, 3, 4 buildings that were constructed, 3 residential buildings and 1 community building. There are yet 2 buildings that have to be constructed yet in Phase 2. Phase 3 has not been touched at this point. We've prepared plans, but construction probably pretty far out. Phase 4, again, we haven't even developed plans for Phase 4 yet. Phase 5 is the meadows. The orange building is the existing building, and then the 2 buildings in dark, in the black, are the future buildings, 5.2 and 5.3. And Shenandoah Boulevard is the highlighted area adjacent to Phase 5 and Phase 1. And it begins where the existing Shenandoah Boulevard ended right between Phases 2 and 3. That's pretty much it.
And briefly, can you describe, as Mr. Rice had indicated, what Phase 5.2 is?
5.2 is this building here, and it'll consist of parking lot here, parking lot behind the building, and a connection with Shenandoah Boulevard. 5.3 is directly below that, and this is the subject of an application that we have before the township. We expect to be in for final approval at the beginning of August.
And what type of buildings will those be?
These are life care buildings.
Okay. And you had indicated Shenandoah Boulevard that extends from, could you show where Egypt Road is?
Egypt Road runs along the bottom of the page, and Shenandoah Boulevard is on the right-hand side of the page. And it goes to the left and traverses along our boundary line, and then makes the connection with Park Avenue at the top of the page.
And can you give approximately where Shenandoah Boulevard is constructed to today?
This area here, again from Egypt Road to a point about midway between Phase 2 or Phase 1 and Phase 2. And the balance of the road is roughly about 2,000 feet to be constructed, beginning at terminus of the existing road out to Park Avenue.
That's really all the questions I had of Mr. Macy.
Mr. Logan, you have questions, Mr. Macy?
Just for
Yeah.
clarification. Mr. Macy, condition number 4 of the approval, sir, condition number 4 of the original conditional use approval reads in part, setting aside a location for and construction of a public thoroughfare with signalization at its intersection with Egypt Road on the premises at a precise location yet to be determined, the purpose of which is to provide through traffic access from Egypt Road through to South Park Avenue. Now, sir, what you have been testifying about is that specific partially completed now and anticipated to be completed access road, correct?
Yes,
And this is the location which has now been finalized, which at the time of the initial conditional use had not yet been determined. Is that correct?
that is correct.
And at the time of were you a participant in the original application for the conditional use?
I was.
And at the time, were the circumstances of both the traffic conditions at Egypt Road and South Park Avenue different than they are today?
Yes.
Thank you. I do not have any other questions.
Board have any questions for Mr. Macy? Questions? Okay. Ms. Kearney, do you have another witness?
Frank Montgomery, Montgomery.
And Mr. Rice, I'm not sure if you want me to go through all of Frank's qualifications or if the board would accept him as a traffic expert, a traffic engineer.
Traffic engineer and expert.
Engineer.
I don't, Mr. Logan, do you have any?
I do not. I would so stipulate as far as his expertise in the area of traffic engineering.
And he'll be
And if the board had any questions.
Board have questions or? Okay.
Frank, you've been retained by the applicant to represent it for the purposes of this conditional use hearing.
That's correct.
And how long have you been involved in this project, the Shannondale project?
Well, good evening, Madam Chair, board members. I'm Frank Montgomery with Traffic Planning and Design, and I've been working with Audubon Land Development for about the past 10 to 12 years. More specifically on this project, my involvement began probably around 2008 after I returned back from a National Guard stint in Iraq. I was brought on board to work on this project as well as several other projects in both Upper and Lower Providence Townships.
And can you briefly describe where, as Brad has indicated, where Shannondale Boulevard is?
Sure.
I'm sorry. This is Exhibit 3.
On Exhibit A3, I'm pointing to Egypt Road, and at its terminus there with Shannondale Boulevard, its signalized intersection. And here is the alignment here up to Park Avenue, as indicated by Mr. Macy.
And you had presented to the Planning Commission a series of slides. Do we have those slides? Okay. In reference to Park Avenue. Can you just give a brief background about what we were explaining at the Planning Commission?
Sure. We had presented information at the Planning Commission regarding this application as well as 5.2, the Meadows. And what you're looking at currently is Exhibit A7. And what this shows was a result of a series of analyses and further exhibits I'll be discussing later. And the gist of it is as you can see, it shows some of the local roadways, Trooper Road, Egypt Road. It shows in green here the potential or the proposed Shannondale extension. In red, the alignment of Park Avenue. And on the left over here shows Crawford Road. And there's a dashed blue line that's a potential connector, and I'll discuss that a little further. And the purpose of this slide is to discuss in these two boxes here in red the additional traffic that can be anticipated to utilize Park Avenue if this extension of Shannondale Boulevard was made public. So this is the traffic that you could anticipate would now utilize, whether it be Shannondale or Egypt Road, they would now access and turn either left or right onto Park. These are trips per hour. Typically, we look at the morning and afternoon rush hour. So if you see here, as I'm pointing to the right, if you made a right onto Park Avenue from Shannondale towards Ridge, you could expect an additional 336 trips in the morning rush hour and 276 p.m. trips in the p.m. peak hour. In the morning, they would mostly be coming down. In the evening, they would mostly be heading back out to Ridge. Likewise, in the morning, You would have 85 additional trips on this stretch of park and 250 in the afternoon. More than likely, most of them would be heading down to turn onto Eagleville Road or move further along Egypt.
And the following slide is, I believe, Exhibit 8, correct?
That's correct.
And can you explain what we're looking at there?
Sure. This slide depicts some graphics of some circles and some stars that go along Park Avenue from Ridge down to Eagleville Crawford intersection, and what they are approximate driveway locations, or the red dots here, of residential single-family homes, essentially. There are approximately 85. I did this via Google Earth. And then there are about 12 road intersections as well, that, you know, the local roads that serve other residential areas back there, and those are shown with yellow stars. And the reason I have this slide up is to more or less indicate that the very residential nature of Park Avenue. And if you remember the slide prior, if Shenandoah Boulevard were open to the public and signalized, it's anticipated that that traffic would now be going past all of these driveways.
And the next slide, I believe, is correct, is 10?
That's correct. Or Exhibit
I'm sorry,
A9.
9. And can you explain what we're seeing here?
Sure. This would just take a little further snapshot out of how traffic is essentially getting north in the township that would potentially utilize Shenandoah Boulevard if it were extended and made public. People come up Trooper today and go up Ridge, or some folks come over Shenandoah and they take Crawford Road, or Egypt to Crawford to Eagleville to wherever they're heading. So we're showing that more or less that people who are utilizing Trooper and Ridge, where traffic belongs, is the nature of the road, could potentially now utilize this and end up the very heavy movements on Park Avenue. Also in this picture, part of what we were asked to look at is, obviously this application is over 16 years old. A lot has changed, as Mr. Rice had indicated, and there's a lot of development that is on here that was not here 16 years ago, and along with that does go the traffic. And so traffic patterns have changed. Shenandoah Boulevard, for the little stretch that it is between Trooper and Egypt, does carry a lot of traffic, and I think what you can anticipate is if a public connection was made to Park Avenue, that more people would use Shenandoah Boulevard than currently do, and potentially affect other off-site intersections, Shenandoah and Trooper, or changing traffic patterns up at Ridge and Park.
And finally, the last slide, which I believe is actually the Exhibit A10. Can you explain what we're seeing here?
Sure. On Exhibit A10, we're sort of jumping ahead a little, and some of the other analysis and reports that I've done will talk a little more to this, but what you're looking at is a proposed roadway improvement at the intersection of Eagleville, Park, and Crawford. As many of you are probably familiar with this, it's an offset intersection with Crawford down here and Eagleville here. It's currently unsignalized. There is a lot of turning movements from both Egypt and this jog movement here. It's been identified by PennDOT as being an unsafe intersection. They have studied it. And what we were asked to look at is potentially creating an improvement here that would align the intersection in some form or another and signalize it with turning lanes on Egypt. And the purpose of this improvement is first and foremost a safety improvement, but we also feel as though it would be a capacity improvement with the addition of lanes, especially along Egypt, where there is truck traffic along Park, and you can now get the residential traffic in its own lane, segregated from the truck traffic that's going through. And again, I'll discuss this a little more as I go further down through the exhibits.
And when you referenced on the first slide, the bottom, you said, I'll talk about this at Crawford later. This was the slide you were referencing to that you were going to talk about later, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And we did sort of jump ahead on the, could you briefly explain, and it is marked as exhibits? 11, the traffic report or traffic assessment dated March 14, 2014 that you prepared?
Sure. We were asked to look at the effects as to whether Shenandoah Boulevard was made a public road with and without. So we did it analyzing the development of Shenandoah, both the Meadows 5-2 as well as the balance of the site, all of the remaining phases. And we were asked to look at whether Shenandoah was open to the public or not open to the public, and to do a comparison to see benefits or negative effects of doing that. And essentially the report indicates that if Shenandoah were made public through, I am going to jump back to Exhibit A7. If it were made a public road through, that the impact would be from a positive standpoint. There were some movements that got better, but overall, there was not really much of a benefit in the local road network. In fact, some movements, as I had identified down at Trooper and Shenandoah, you would actually have more people trying to turn left, go past the Wawa and the Giant now and go up, and you would actually exacerbate some of those movements rather than just leaving it as it is today. And that was essentially what the report was asked to do, was to draw a conclusion as to whether the making of Shenandoah Boulevard a public road was going to be some great benefit or if there were any negative effects.
And as part of the process of going through the land development, you had also done a response letter dated May 21st, 2014, in reference to a McMahon letter that had been prepared, which is marked as Exhibit 12. Can you briefly explain what that is?
Sure. As we typically go through submission processes, we receive review letters. Your consultant, McMahon Associates, had provided that. We provided a response, and in general, the comments were all a will comply or a clarification, with the exception of one, and that being a discussion about the improvement at at Crawford, Eagleville, and Park. And essentially, since that time, we have come to an agreement where the applicant is committed to complete that improvement as part of as an agreement as part of this conditional use process. So that was the only comment that was sort of outstanding the way the letter is framed. And again, since that time, it has been clarified, and the applicant has agreed to, and that he's committed to that development being completed.
And Frank, that would be Exhibit A14, your recent letter of July 15th, correct, where you actually set forth the off-site improvements and the cost for those.
Correct. Part of the agreement for this to not be made a public road, the reason why we're here this evening, was sort of broken into an agreement that the monies that would be needed to not only physically build the road and connect it to Park, but also some of the external improvements that might be required potentially by PennDOT at off-site intersections, that the money that would be utilized for that, dollar for dollar, be spent on a meaningful improvement that would benefit the local area, and that's this improvement that we have identified. They are committed to that. The township has submitted a request to have this improvement put on PennDOT's Transportation Improvement Program called the TIP. It is currently at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission for consideration, and we have letters of endorsement, or the township was able to obtain letters of endorsement, and hopefully I don't steal any thunder here, but from Senator Rafferty's office, Representative Verb's office, the Greater Valley Forge Transportation Management Association. So we have what we feel are some very good endorsements for this safety improvement, but most importantly is the dedicated funding. Typically 30% funding is required. We're well over 40% with the committed funds of $2.3 million of off-site improvements, fee in lieu of off-site improvements. So total commitment is $3 million. $700,000 roughly will be spent to actually construct Shenandoah Boulevard. That road will be utilized as an emergency access. The applicant will coordinate with the township so that they have access to it to utilize in emergency situations, and that it will be its purpose. It will not be for residents or usage of that. It will be for emergency purposes only.
And Frank, could you briefly explain, and Brad may have touched on this, about the gates?
Sure. There will be gates. I'll point down to Exhibit A3 on the plan here, on both ends, up at Park Avenue. And again, it's emergency access only. There will be a turnaround area provided in case somebody went off the road, thought they could get in, they realized they couldn't. And then a gate area in this area, again, with a turnaround area. So anybody who does make it in will have ample ability to turn around and get back to where they need to go. Furthermore, I wanted to point, one of the findings of our report was that from a planning standpoint, adding all of that additional traffic along Shenandoah Boulevard through an age-qualified development where many of them would be turning into the various locations, whether they're residents, caregivers, or visitors. It's just not necessarily sound transportation planning in terms of having all those age-qualified residents have to deal with essentially commuter traffic on their private road, on their road that they take access to.
And Frank, you sort of touched on this a little bit, but if you could expand on this. The changed circumstances from 1998 to today to request the modification of condition number 4 to allow the Shenandoah Boulevard to be private. Can you elaborate on that a little?
Sure. Essentially, when the conditional use was granted, although I was not involved with the Shenandoah project at that time, they had a different engineer involved. Just our knowledge from the area and the increasing development where we have been part of some projects, whether with Audubon Land or other developers in the area, we've just seen an overwhelming increase of traffic, especially along Shenandoah Boulevard, and we feel as though that reasoning is you don't want that additional through traffic to be going not only along an age-qualified area, but also along Park Avenue that has multiple 85 or so residential driveways along that stretch, as well as many residential roads that serve even more homes. So that was sort of the purpose of why we were looking to not have it be a public road.
And can you just briefly explain, you had talked about the PennDOT, the TIP, the timing of how that would work?
I believe everything's been submitted, the package is in. We had a June 30th deadline, and your consultant and our firm had collaborated to get that in. It provides the specified cost estimate, as well as breakdown of the project. And I believe in the fall, everything is identified, whether it is on the tip or not on the tip. And again, we feel very confident that this project, given all the positives, would be on there.
And just looking at Exhibit A14 in reference to the commitment, the Audubon Land Development, the developer has committed to the $2.3 million, correct?
That's correct.
And just briefly, Frank, in your opinion, will the requested modification and proposed improvements be appropriate for this Shenandoah development?
Yes, I do believe so.
And in your opinion, will the requested modification and proposed improvements adversely affect the character of the surrounding land use or the general neighborhood?
No, I don't believe so.
In your opinion, will the requested modification and proposed improvements create hazardous conditions at intersections or areas of poor road alignment?
No, I don't believe so.
And in your opinion, will the requested modification and proposed improvements create any undue congestion?
No.
And finally, in your opinion, does the requested modification and proposed improvements make good planning sense?
I believe so.
I think those are all the questions I had of Frank.
Okay. Mr. Logan?
I'll stand over here, sir. I want to go through a few things for the benefit of the board, just so we're all starting from the same place. as I understand the previous testimony of the witness, this is actually the first time that any Board of Supervisors of this township has had the opportunity to review actual conditions based upon actually a built-out condition that was not existing in or about 1998. Is that correct?
I would agree with that.
And based upon your evaluation of the current conditions, you have reached certain conclusions as to what is necessary in order to essentially effectuate the conditional use that this board is considering this evening, actually a modification, correct?
That's correct.
And part of what you've considered are embraced in a couple of documents that you've generated. And I'm going to start with the last one, because I have a short memory, at least that'll get me somewhere, which is, I believe, your thank you, A14, which is your July 15, 2014 correspondence. Do you
Correct.
see it? Okay, thank you. Now, I want to make sure, and I will later request, or perhaps even Mr. Rice will, that these are requested conditions of the conditional use that the applicant is making, correct?
That's correct.
So that if this board agrees that a modification to the conditional use is appropriate, that these are conditions of that conditional use that are being offered by the applicant to the township.
That is correct.
And first, one of those things that everybody is always gravitating to is dollars. There is a offer of a commitment of $3 million broken into those pieces which are reflected on A14. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And of those funds, $705,400 in your estimate for the construction of Shenandoah that would not be paid to the township, that would be utilized for the purposes of actually doing the road construction.
That's correct.
The balance of $524,900 and $1,769,700 is being offered to the township, correct?
That is correct.
And that is not a conditional offer. That is, the township would receive those funds for their use, again, subject to what is being identified as being appropriate in your opinion. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And these are non-refundable funds, right?
That's my understanding.
Okay, just want to make sure that this isn't a, I'll give it to you and maybe I'll ask for it back. Okay, so now we have that. So that the township will receive the sum of $524,900 and $1,769,700, and that is an offered condition by this applicant.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, I also read your letter, which is it's your response letter to McMahon's comments. If you could find that, I think it's A12.
Correct.
And there are certain observations and responses that you've made to the traffic consultant to the township, which I'd just like to highlight a few and make sure that these are also offered conditions.
Yes,
Okay?
understood.
So let me just see if we can just abbreviate some of it, and then I'd just like to focus in on one or two things, okay? Those items, and the board will certainly have an opportunity to review it, where it is a will comply, those are offered conditions irrevocable by the applicant, correct?
That's correct.
And I saw that part of what you've recommended is certain types of construction, even though this is not to be a thoroughfare, meaning open to traffic, that this is nevertheless to be constructed to roadway specification. This isn't going to be a driveway, right?
That's correct.
So we're going to have a, what I will call, excuse the expression, real road, and there is also to be, it is to be gated at one end. Is that correct?
It will be gated at the end near Park Avenue, and it will be also gated down closer to Egypt, not at Egypt, but into the site a bit.
And
So
I
we'll have
know-
gate, sorry.
I noted that that is for emergency access, correct?
That's correct. The portion, and I'm pointing to Exhibit A3, that this portion here will be gated, and it will only be utilized for emergency access only for folks who would be trying to enter from Park Avenue. From Egypt, it is open until you approach a gate, in which case you need to have a business on the premises in order to move forward into the site. So hopefully to directly answer your question, that this entire stretch of road is potentially an emergency access for use by the township if required, but day to day will just be utilized by Shenandoah.
All right, just so we're clear, the township will have access to utilize in those circumstances where it deems to be appropriate. Emergency is one way of saying it, but certainly for public works purposes or other necessities, they would have unfettered access, right?
That's correct.
And that is a condition also offered to this board.
It is.
Okay. Now, the intersection at Crawford and, I believe you said Crawford and Park, is that correct? That is to be modified, is that right?
That's correct.
And that is a condition now that you've identified in the exhibit that is before us right now as one of those intersections that do have ongoing current traffic issues that need to be addressed. Is that right?
That's correct.
And this is a part of those opinions that you've rendered, which thank you. That if we can just take a quick look at the exhibit that is now up on the board.
Sure. Exhibit A10, yes.
Thank you. Now, what is the condition that is to be addressed specifically in the modification?
In my opinion, there will be two conditions, safety and capacity, and they're sort of multifaceted. I'll briefly run through in that safety, as I had indicated before, comes in a couple different ways of left turn lanes on Egypt that would be constructed as part of this, which currently, if you want to turn left, if you're traveling on Park Avenue, I will call it eastbound, and want to turn left onto Eagleville Road, you would have to sit in the through lane, and obviously if a truck is bearing down, they don't have anywhere to go if you're stopped suddenly. So there will be a left turn lane on either approach, which again removes passenger car traffic from through traffic. There will be a traffic signal, which will allow protected movement from both Eagleville and Crawford, whereas today it's unsignalized. There is a stop control. You're essentially waiting for a gap to turn out, whereas with the traffic signal, you'll have protected movements. And then from a capacity standpoint, we're adding lanes, and again, we're providing protected movements dedicated for these side streets.
And it's your opinion, and I believe that this enhances the safety of the traveling public in and around that intersection.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Have you had the opportunity to review any of this with the traffic engineer for the township?
Yes. As part of the grant application, there were several steps that are required, some of which included a field visit with PennDOT, representatives from PennDOT and I believe the DEP on separate occasions, and to evaluate what could be done out there, what should be done. Looked at several alternatives, and this is currently the preferred alternative. It's not a final alternative by any means, but those are the types of collaborations that occurred.
And you and Mr. Moore, to my right, have had the opportunity to review together some of the traffic concerns together.
Yes, we
Is that
have.
right? And you would agree generally with his comments. He'll testify in a moment, but you've intended to embrace those conceptually to have final design, obviously, concerns that were raised by the township.
That's correct.
Okay. One last area, I hope. This is one of those lawyers' one last areas, of course. There was also an indication in your earlier letter, not the one from most recently, about talking about the applicant owning rights of way for certain improvements that may be necessary. Is part of the offer of conditions of the conditional use that the applicant will provide that necessary rights of way, those necessary rights of way that are appropriate for the implementation of what you're proposing?
It's my understanding that the applicant is going to make every best effort to obtain those rights of way himself, but did not want to preclude the ability to have assistance from any other municipality, agency, anything like that. So the first best effort will be on the applicant.
Okay, so that will be an assumed obligation of the applicant, cost, expense, and effort. Is that correct?
There were allocations for right-of-way put into the cost estimate, so yes, that is part of the application.
Okay. I do not believe I have any other questions at this time. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Montgomery, just this particular plan, the legend on the bottom right-hand corner, there's notes. It's on.
It's on.
I have one. I have to just speak into it. Mr. Montgomery, on this exhibit that shows the Park Eagleville Crawford Road proposed improvement, those notes on the bottom right-hand corner, that's a summary of what's proposed in terms of it. There's a road realignment, correct?
That's correct.
There's left turn lanes on Park Avenue going both ways, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and there's a bridge to be replaced on Crawford, is that right?
That's correct, and potentially another structure placed down at Crawford as well.
Okay. The road will be widened, shoulders will be widened.
Correct.
There'll be a traffic signal, basically.
That is correct.
Okay. And that's the overall $5 million cost that's been presented to PennDOT, of which your client is agreed to contribute to 2.3 towards that project.
That's correct.
Okay. I don't have any other questions from Mr. Montgomery. Does the board have any questions?
Mr. Montgomery, talking about the gates that are going to be at Park Avenue, or proposed gates at Park Avenue and Shenandoah Boulevard, will they be man gates like are currently at the main entrance to Shenandoah, from Shenandoah Boulevard, or will they be some sort of automated gate?
No, those will be automated.
Okay, and will they be operated by a remote control, sort of like a garage door signal, or?
I believe it'll be like a key fob. The details of those gates will be provided to the township as part of land development, but my understanding it'll be sort of like a key fob, and obviously the township will have access to that.
When you say, that was my second point, when you say the township will have access to that, will the police department be given those key fobs? Will the ambulance services be given those key fobs? Will the fire department be given those key fobs so they have access to go back there whenever they're called through 911 or dispatch or anything else, so that if there's an emergency in Shenandoah, the residents of Shenandoah will have as quick emergency response as possible by the services of the emergency departments?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I have just a few questions. On your exhibit A7, this is the one with the peak trips. Do you have an idea of how many daily trips currently occur on Shenandoah Boulevard? I like to talk
Give me
in
one
terms-
moment.
I like to think in terms of daily trips, not the peak trips. That seems to confuse me.
What I'll do is approximate. Rule of thumb is we'll take the PM peak hour and times it by 10. And that usually gives you a rough estimate of who's utilizing that road, considering the nature of the commercial use or retail uses on either side. It's probably going to be maybe conservative.
Okay.
Approximately 9,000 cars per day.
Currently.
Currently, correct.
Okay. And so then from this exhibit A7, it looks like, could I then assume that it's another 2,700 trips could be added to this new portion on top of that 9,000?
No, what will happen are folks that are currently utilizing maybe Egypt to Crawford might now come up, so it's not a one-for-one.
Okay.
Some people might divert and start utilizing the area now. But I wouldn't say it's a one-for-one.
Okay, because I was just using, so in your red block there, you have 336 AM trips, 276 PM trips. That section, that's your additional traffic with Shenandoah. So that's what I was,
Correct. Some folks who might be just coming down Egypt, instead of coming down and going out, might come up. So it doesn't necessarily mean they'll be on Shenandoah, but some will.
okay. But 9,000 currently. That's a lot of cars.
Approximately.
I seem to recall Arcola Road Bridge was about 9,000 daily cars, if I have a good memory. So, for reference sake. Okay, so that answers that one. I believe I have one more for you. And these are current trips. You did this in 2014, spring of 2014, you did these estimates?
Some of the traffic counts might be a year or two older from when we started this process, but the estimates that you're looking at are within a year.
Okay, okay. Patrick stole my question about the gates, because that's certainly a concern. So, thank you, Patrick. My question then for the offering of the 3 million and how you've broken that down. If I can find that, that's what, 14? 14. Okay. So, second line item, Park Avenue / Shenandoah intersection improvements, it's listed at $524,900. Can you explain why it's just not lumped together with the third item, the
The applicant asked me the same thing. The reason I broke that separately was your traffic consultant, McMahon Associates, had done a very good escrow analysis, and this was a broken out line item, and what I didn't want to represent was that this was some off-site intersection at, say, Ridge and Park or Trooper and Shenandoah. This is connected to the site, however, it's not being constructed. So in parentheses, I had put not being constructed, and as you see below, not being constructed as part of this project, because those may get done at a later date. In fact, some of those might get done with another application into the township. So that's why those two are broken separately. It's just shy of 2.3 million.
Oh, maybe Casey can help me with that one. I don't want to be, I mean, there's already been a commitment of just over 2 million for the grant application for the park in Crawford. The way I'm reading this is then only 1.7 roughly million is being.
Well, let me try, because I think you're going to testify under oath shortly. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
I might be way ahead of you. Sorry.
But I mean, the Shenandoah Park Avenue intersection improvements, there were some improvements that both you and Mr. Moore calculated that PennDOT would likely require because of the road going through as a public road, correct?
Correct.
I mean, so those numbers, you know, have been added into, and that's in excess of the $700,000. You had to build the road either way.
Correct.
The road's built, whether it's public or private, it's about $700,000. So that these additional numbers are based on, you know, what costs are being eliminated as a result of this not being a public road and a through road, and it includes, you know, what PennDOT would likely require if it was a public road.
Correct. And to address the Madam Chair's question, that improvement essentially could be lumped in with the 1.769. I chose to break it out just to show that it's not being constructed. It's not proposed to be constructed. It just happened to be sort of an extension of the site, Shenandoah driveway. It's turning lanes, a traffic signal, that sort of thing. So it is dedicated $2.3 million for the township.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you have a timetable for completion of Shenandoah Boulevard, even as a private road?
I do not. I know the applicant's very eager to get started. He will be before the board for land development approval in August, and I think he's got people standing by. So, but I can't indicate when.
You obviously have a master plan that's been in the works for some period of time, and there are several phases on that plan that are not yet built. Do you have a timetable for completion of those phases?
Mr. Macy would probably be the better witness for that question, but I think he had indicated in some testimony that some phases were not even planned, others were probably more imminent.
Okay, and where I'm going with this as the traffic engineer, are you confident that were those phases to be built, that one area of ingress and egress to Shenandoah would accommodate all future building?
Excellent question, and yes, our analysis exhibit, and again, I didn't go in great detail to bore everyone, but it is exhibit A11 basically included not only the Meadows 5.2, but then we projected out to, I believe, 2020 conditions, assuming the entire Shenandoah development of, I believe it's upwards of 2,500 units would be constructed and put that traffic on the road. The good thing is that there is capacity on those lanes because they're not overly utilized today for the traffic that's coming just directly in and out of Shenandoah. So we're confident. Typically on larger developments, you at least like to see an emergency access as a secondary, and that's what's being provided.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other board questions?
Yes, I had a question. I'm rather interested in how we got to the 2.3 million. I understand that you and Mr. McMahon had gotten, or Casey had gotten together and came up with what you expected PennDOT to require you to do. Was there a consultation of what PennDOT would, with PennDOT, of what they'd require you to do?
I had not consulted. Mr. Moore did consult with PennDOT. I can't say that I was in complete agreement with everything that was brought to the table. We sort of took a look at it from, if I was presenting this to PennDOT, I would probably not indicate that for a small age-qualified residential development that's not going to put a lot of traffic on the road, despite the more of the traffic generation would be providing a new road that's public and it would move some traffic around that doesn't currently use it today. We would look to mitigate our impacts on the local intersections. So there would be a difference in what we feel is required and what the township, probably working with PennDOT, would like to see. They're not going to be the same thing. So somewhere in the middle is where we're at.
Somewhere in the middle.
Correct.
So less than what McMahon Associates would expect the improvements to cost.
That's correct.
Okay. And the impact that you spoke of, if I heard you right, your position would be because the community that you're introducing to the roadways through Shenandoah Boulevard, that would be your concern and not the other traffic that was going to use it? I'm not sure I heard that right.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
It seemed to be that the impact that was created by opening a public road, not by the residents in your community, not that impact, but the impact by others using that road. You didn't feel responsible for that, or because that was part of the condition of the original agreement. So,
Okay, so I think I understand your question correctly. It's whether or not if we opened Shenandoah to be public, and now commuters vary their traffic patterns, that we would be responsible for that. Obviously, the township and PennDOT certainly would like us, I would say at a minimum, at least the way I would present it as an application, to mitigate any significant delays or queuing that would occur as a result of that. I wouldn't necessarily offer that we need to fix existing problems that are occurring, because in theory we're just moving some traffic from Ridge and putting it on Park. So we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak.
okay, thank you.
Any other board questions? Ms. Kearney, do you have any other follow-up questions with?
No.
Okay, Mr. Logan?
No, Mr. President.
Okay. Any other witnesses?
No, Mr.
Okay. So you're resting, and Mr. Logan, you have a witness.
I do.
Yeah.
Good evening, Board. My name is Casey, C-A-S-E-Y, middle initial A, last name Moore, M-O-O-R-E.
Thank you. Members of the board, I know that you know who Mr. Moore is, and I will be offering him as an expert in traffic engineering and planning. And rather than go through the credentials and build up a record for no apparent good reason, I just wonder if council will stipulate as to the expertise of Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Okay. Will be accepted.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Moore, were you present during the presentation of the applicant this evening?
I was indeed.
And prior to the presentation, have you been involved in the review of various plans, planning, correspondence related to this very application?
Yes, I have.
And can you explain to the board what your involvement has been so far up until to this evening?
Certainly. My involvement has entailed the traffic engineering review for Shenandoah Boulevard and for the land development phases that have occurred in recent years, dating back to the mid-2000s. My firm has performed reviews of the land development phases and looked at the traffic engineering and the impacts on the surrounding roads. We've produced comment letters suggesting certain improvements be made and certain others be looked at in the future. Toward the late 2000s, the unit maximum for the trigger to the conditional use in the opening of Shenandoah Boulevard as a public thoroughfare was looked at by our firm for the township to look at escrow funding that would be required in case this road did need to extend, and the inability of the applicant or the developer to do that work. We spent quite a bit of time with the applicant and their engineers to come to some understanding where we've produced some memos. Some of those are contained in the exhibits that have been presented. We evaluated the cost estimates for the road itself, Shenandoah Boulevard, to make the connection. We also looked at the endpoints at Park Avenue as well as Egypt Road. There was a component to that that has always been a comment of ours, and what if this road was opened now 15 or 16 years later after the conditional use, and the impacts that traffic would have on the diversion to this road. We certainly, as the township's traffic consultant, wouldn't want to open a new road that was good from Egypt to Park, but not to the other ends in which traffic would be diverted. And that's where we've also focused some time in recent months and weeks, including a recent meeting, as Mr. Thomas had asked of the other witness with PennDOT, to get some kind of guideline and concurrence from them as to what they may require without them having the benefit of detailed study and evaluation, but that we have had that, because the applicant has not gone to PennDOT with this, I would say, since the 2007-2008 time frame.
Now, Mr. Moore, if you could just give a brief overview of what the traffic concerns that you observed and believed needed to be addressed as conditions of any conditional use modification from 1998. You can just give a brief overview, even perhaps pointing to those locations which may highlight those conditions that need to be addressed.
Well, in 1998, there was quite a bit of development that was not developed as it is today in the area. This includes Audubon Square and the build-out of Audubon Square, what's happening with a new proposal by the applicant known as Audubon 5. Across the street of Trooper Road into West Norton Township, there's a Walmart superstore along with Home Depot and other development in that area. The Wawa, the Qdoba, those locations weren't present at the time of the conditional use. As those phases of development have occurred, Shenandoah Boulevard, which now connects from Trooper to Egypt, and then extends privately into the residential community. The commercial portion of that roadway has carried an increased burden over the years. And more people have begun to use it not only because of the uses that are there, but because they are trying to get to points north and west in the township, to points south and east in the township, leading to the Trooper Road interchange at, with 422. So there was what I believe there was not a detailed traffic analysis done of the effects of this roadway from Egypt up to Park. There was the idea that this road would serve as a benefit, but no detailed analysis. We've been looking at detailed analysis over the last many years, and that's been a benefit to us coming to some conclusions. There is a noted crash pattern, safety pattern issue in the commercial area of Shenandoah Boulevard between Trooper Road and Egypt Road, and those issues will only be exacerbated if Shenandoah Boulevard is extended as originally proposed up to Park Avenue. There's numerous access points along Shenandoah Boulevard in that area, and the traffic that will want to divert up to Park Avenue to either avoid or shortcut other routes it may have taken today without that connection up to Park Avenue will cause more traffic concerns and difficulty for those patrons that are in and out of that commercial area. So our bigger picture study of this has involved not only the points from Egypt Road to Park Avenue, but start at Trooper Road, where people would divert to not come down Trooper Road to Ridge and turn up this way and then go through this road up to Park, the Shenandoah Boulevard extension, and then turn down Park Avenue to Ridge and go to their destination. It would be the reverse in the morning, coming south on Valley Forge Road, Park Avenue to the intersection with Ridge, continuing down Park, potentially turning left on the Shenandoah Boulevard extension and continuing down to Trooper to make the right turn. There is some traffic in the study, and we concur with those movements as well, that would utilize this extension, if it were up to Park Avenue, to turn left and avoid the Crawford Road jog intersection with Eagleville to come and turn right onto Eagleville Road. So as you see on this, I think this is Exhibit A4, is that correct? This aerial? A7?
Seven.
This Exhibit A7, Mr. Montgomery and his firm have enumerated some trips just during the peak hour in the morning and the afternoon that would be added to Park Avenue.
Would you like a glass of water?
Certainly.
There.
Now that you had your water, you can continue on, please. You're doing very well. I don't have to ask a question. If you could just keep on explaining what you've observed, what is needed, and your opinion for the board in that regard.
Okay. So getting to the area improvements that we feel are needed if this road were to be opened publicly as a public thoroughfare, The intersection down here at Trooper and Shenandoah near the Boulevard of the Generals, that signalized intersection, will at a minimum need an extension of the northbound left turn lane to turn on there. The left turn lane is inadequate today. In the future, with the opening of Shenandoah Boulevard, it would need to be increased because more traffic would be diverted to that route, and we'd want it to work. We would not want it to block the through lanes northbound on Trooper Road. At the intersection of Egypt Road with Shenandoah Boulevard, and this is one of the things that traffic planning and design in their evaluation differed from our evaluation as a township, and then we had shared this with PennDOT, was that at this intersection there are queues that exist today northbound on Shenandoah Boulevard. A lot of those queues are a result of the left turn movement from Shenandoah onto Egypt Road. But nonetheless, even if signal timing adjustments were done in and of themselves at that intersection as recommended initially by the applicant's consultant, we believe there's physical improvements such as adding capacity along Egypt Road that may necessitate the reduction of those queues and allow more time to be put onto Shenandoah Boulevard if it's made a through road. Up at the intersection at Park and Shenandoah Boulevard, if that is connected through as a public thoroughfare, there number one would need to be auxiliary lanes, left turn and right turn lanes put on Park Avenue, as well as signalization to control the movements. That, I think, is broken out in Mr. Montgomery's July 15th memo as a $525,000 odd cost. At the intersection of Park Avenue with Ridge Pike, again, Mr. Montgomery and the applicant had looked at that intersection as a mitigation measure solely for their development, and had looked at timing adjustments of that signal. This is a very difficult peak hour intersection with long queues along Ridge Pike as well as along Park Avenue. If we're going to spend the money to build a new road and divert traffic to that intersection, we want it to work. So we talked to PennDOT about that within the last week and a half, and showed them what we thought would be needed there, which involved some physical improvements to add either lanes along Ridge Pike or Park Avenue or both. Those costs that of the intersection improvements at Park and Ridge, Egypt and Shenandoah and Trooper form the basis of that additional $1.7 million some dollars in the memo. The $500,000 estimate was for the intersection of Shenandoah Boulevard and Park Avenue. I will go back and say that we did meet with PennDOT because we'd been making some suggestions that the applicant meet with PennDOT. The township wanted to make sure that at least we had talked to PennDOT about these off-site improvements, and if the road were opened up to public thoroughfare, what they may require. Standards are different than they were 15, 16 years ago. The traffic volumes are different. The safety concerns along Shenandoah Boulevard in the commercial area is high and highly visible to township as well as the police department from all the calls they deal with in that area. And the result of that meeting was very positive in the fact that PennDOT was in concurrence that if a road money was going to be spent to open up another road and divert traffic, they'd want the intersections in and around the diversion to be able to operate.
If we could bring up Exhibit A14, I believe this is the letter with the estimated costs. I think it's A14.
Yes, you had the right one.
Yes. The July 15, 2014 letter. Okay. I'll share. Mr. Moore, you were testifying about numbers, and you were going very good on numbers. Could you take a look at Exhibit A14? And again, for clarity, there are 3 specific categories. And were you a part of the discussions that resulted in these numbers being arrived at?
Yes.
And
yes.
if you could explain what they are, and there was testimony previously that this isn't exactly the amount that you would have wanted, but if you could explain these numbers and whether you're satisfied that these are fair and reasonable numbers with regard to the savings, if you will, to the applicant. If you can just go through them.
Yes, the first number on here, which is the $705,400 for the Shenandoah Boulevard extension, is, first of all, our recommendation has always been that Shenandoah Boulevard should be extended. Whether it's private use or public use has always been part of the question and the subject of tonight's meeting and hearing. That $705,000 is a number that we've evaluated. It's contained in a memo of ours. I'm trying to find the date of that memo. There was a memo we did in June 17, 2011, and updated in March 22nd of 2013, in which we did the estimate for that intersection. So that cost is taken directly from that memorandum. The Park Avenue Shenandoah intersection improvements is also taken as a line item from that memorandum. And as Mr. Montgomery stated, he broke that out specifically so one could see what it would cost if that intersection were improved in and of itself, because that was evaluated within the memorandum and reviewed in detail because there was a plan, an engineered plan to review that from. The last item, which says other off-site improvements, contains what I mentioned at the intersections of Trooper, Shenandoah, and the Boulevard of the Generals, Egypt and Shenandoah Boulevard, and the intersection of Park Avenue with Ridge Pike. Those improvements were not designed in detail. Those improvements were conceptualized on an aerial with what I want to say sketch plans with some analysis that we did over and above what traffic planning and design did and discussed with PennDOT. PennDOT, in theory, and utilizing their guidelines and our feedback with the report that was done by traffic planning and design, evaluated those concepts with us and the order of magnitude costs that they may require. Again, they did not study in detail the costs. They did not study in detail the limits of where the improvements would be. But the $1.7 million in our estimation should cover the improvements that we discussed with them.
Do you have an opinion within a reasonable degree of professional certainty that the numbers reflected on Exhibit A14 reasonably represent the costs for Shenandoah Boulevard extension, the Park Avenue Shenandoah intersection improvements, and the off-site improvements which are not being constructed?
Yes.
And what is your opinion?
My opinion is that they're satisfactory.
Now, one of the board members asked, what will happen prospectively if all the balance of the phases are built out? Has that been considered at all, or would that be something prospectively to be examined in the future?
There was an analysis done with the phases, I believe, in the March 14th traffic study. They provided some feedback to the township and to us what might be done. As a point of clarification, there was a question from the chairwoman on the average daily traffic on Shenandoah Boulevard today, and I believe the testimony was that it was 9,000 vehicles per day today. I looked at the traffic study, and I pulled out from the traffic study on figures 3 and 4 in the appendix area that the two-way traffic volume in the AM is 126 vehicles, And in the PM peak hour is 160 vehicles. That's both in and out of the access point on Shenandoah at Egypt Road. If you use the factor of 10 that Mr. Montgomery mentioned for average daily traffic along that road and multiply times the PM peak, you're getting around 1,600 vehicles per day. And I think that's very important because I think 9,000 was too high of a number when I heard it, and I don't believe that it's in that neighborhood today. In fact, we did some calculations based on the trip generation that would be created with all 2,500 plus or minus units as proposed with the master plan here, and we believe it's going to be in the neighborhood of a total of somewhere in the high 4,000s to 5,000 vehicles per day when the entire site is built.
Mr. Moore, have you formed an opinion within a reasonable degree of professional certainty as to the impact of the requested modification of the conditional use on the health, safety, and welfare of the community?
Yes, my opinion is that the proposed privatization of the roadway with the gated entryways on the north and south ends of Shenandoah Boulevard in exchange for the monetary value of improvements needed if it was a public thoroughfare to be applied toward a very dangerous and safety-stricken intersection at Crawford, Eagleville Park is in best interest of the community.
And you heard the offer of conditions by the applicant. Do you believe that all of those other offered conditions are appropriate or necessary for the benefit or the health, safety, and welfare of the community?
I do.
I do not have any other questions of this witness. Thank you.
I think Mr. Logan hit all the questions I had written down.
Mr. Moore, good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for coming back from New Jersey. I know you're up there watching your daughter in the regional softball.
Yes,
so
thank you.
As I asked Mr. Montgomery before, the access gates, one of my main concerns is with the safety of the residents that actually live back there in Shenandoah, and especially if you're adding more residents to the number. I think it's very important that they have access to the service. Will a gate at Park Avenue with the completed Shenandoah Boulevard as proposed by the applicant increase the ability for emergency vehicles to get back there and increase response times for those vehicles to get back there and,
For
and
sure.
service the residents?
For sure, and that's part of why we asked that this road, no matter if it was public or privatized with the gates, to be put all the way through to Park Avenue. And I concur with your question before that all emergency vehicles and public works vehicles be equipped with the necessary key fobs, if that's how they're going to do it, to enter that roadway for that quick emergency.
One of my other concerns is obviously the economic viability of our major thoroughfares such as Trooper Road, Ridge Pike. I think over the year we've seen some decline in some of the businesses on there. Will keeping vehicle traffic on those thoroughfares as opposed to sending them through the back roads of the township help with, the number of visits to those businesses on Ridge Pike and Trooper Road and the other main economic and industrial thoroughfares?
I definitely agree that any commercial business that lives by, pass by traffic or traffic in front of their business to make their business successful is important. These are state roads. Trooper Road's a state road. Ridge Pike in that area is a state road, county road. It is part of the state route. And I believe that that's where we should keep the traffic rather than on the private road and then in front of the residents, the many residential driveways along Park Avenue.
Thank you.
Good evening, Casey. Can you please also speak to an item in your letter of May 12th that speaks to, it states, to this end, McMahon also feels that it is important that the master plan of Audubon land development property in the commercial area opposite Shannondale must provide for a convenient alternative travel route between Trooper Road and Egypt Road. Can you speak to that as well as we consider
Yeah,
traffic all in
certainly.
the area?
And I'll use this exhibit A7 as a reference to that. Down in the lower left-hand corner here, you'll see a blue dashed line that it kind of goes off the page where it hits the Trooper Road location. But that dashed line indicates that there is a thought process by the applicant for the future development phases of their land, which incorporates all that I'm circling and fronting Egypt Road near the Rittenhouse Road intersection, that road will come through and also be able to access that. We feel as though that is very important so that all of the future development doesn't pour toward Shannondale Boulevard and also has access directly to Egypt Road, and people can then use Egypt Road to turn left, to turn right on Crawford, to go through a newly aligned intersection that's signalized and safer, to head to points northwest, and those people from the northwest to come back southeast.
Thank you. And one other question, shifting gears to, in the event that Shannondale Boulevard was built as a public road, the intersection of Park Avenue, does the applicant currently have the land necessary to make the improvements to that intersection, or would there need to be land acquisition across the street?
Meaning if it was a public
If it was a
road.
public road.
Yeah, if that was a public road, there are some improvements for the auxiliary lanes that would wander off of the applicant's property onto properties, either driveway adjustments across the street, relocation of utilities, the traffic signal that would monitor the access point from Shannondale Boulevard. Some of those things will require additional land that's not owned by the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else from the board?
I just had one question. Casey, there's a rating system for intersections. Do you happen to know offhand what Crawford and Eagleville and Park is rated currently?
Yes, at Crawford and Eagleville, there's two different, because it's two unsignalized intersections, and I'll be a little bit careful with what I'm going to say because when you use a traffic analysis tool and you just use it as an isolated intersection measure, A being what you want to get on your report card and F being what you don't want to come home with on your report card, PennDOT finds everything as D as a passing grade and better acceptable. At this intersection, because there's the traffic gets caught between Eagleville and Crawford, making turning movements, it's impossible to look at it as an isolated intersection analysis. But nonetheless, the isolated intersection analysis shows that the Crawford Road leg operates as a level of service E today, I believe. So if you're coming out of Crawford, and I'll use the PM rush hour as my barometer. Just the other day, I was trying to come out of there, and there was probably 10 to 12 cars backed up from Park Avenue, and you wait several minutes to get out unless there's a courtesy gap. So taking away the courtesy gap factor, or the Q factor, it operates at E. I think that it operates worse than that because the traffic is queuing between the intersections and you're having to wait for a courtesy gap. If the people weren't so pleasant to let you out, it would operate at a level of service F.
Okay.
With the improvements of the realignment, the intersection, I believe, I don't have that data in front of me today, will operate at a C or better all movements.
Okay.
Mr. Montgomery can collaborate that if he doesn't agree.
Definitely better than an E or an F.
Yeah, so we're going to move from a not so good grade to a satisfactory grade, and that's really the best that we can do. This is a very difficult area with the terrain, with the stream, with the sight distances. and with the volume of traffic that goes through there, that's a very impressive upgrade to that intersection.
I have one more question for you. So in your brief, short communications with PennDOT, did they give any indication that this was an intersection that they have on their list that, you know, that they have already decided to improve on their own? Or would this not happen if there was not an infusion of funds?
Yeah, currently this intersection is not on the 12-year program by PennDOT at Eagleville, Crawford, and Park. It is an intersection that has had noticeable concern on their part. It is an intersection that the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission recently studied in a safety study. So it's gotten heightened awareness within PennDOT. It just hadn't made its way to the 12-year program because it is so expensive to fix. And there's a lot of new projects these days because of transportation funding that weren't finding their way onto that official document. Under the passing of the legislation of Act 89, which is the new transportation funding, they created different programs, and one of them is the multimodal fund program, in which the township submitted an application in concert with the funding that the applicant is providing as the local seed money to get the additional $3 million. So all that done and said, I believe that, let's go back to your question. Remind me your question again, because I was going on a tangent.
Would PennDOT have funded that?
Yeah, PennDOT itself would not have funded it. But what gives us great excitement about this intersection is that when we brought this to PennDOT's attention of going after the multimodal grant, they gave us a project manager, which they never do, unless it's a true project. So we got a project manager to work with at PennDOT's offices. They gave us time, they gave us guidance. We had several meetings with them. They actually went to the extent of then bringing DEP to further our process. I believe having those meetings and having that valuable insight as preliminary to get to where we were to file a grant application, having the strong support of Senator Rafferty, of Representative Verb in this area, among the other people that submitted their letters of support, were in a strong position to utilize the $2+ million as the local match money to obtain a grant for this location. And while that's not guaranteed, I think we make a strong case and have a lot of strong support. And there's always the possibility to submit on other grant applications if we're not successful this first time.
Any other board questions?
Yeah,
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
What's the time frame on an answer on that grant?
The grant application will be decided, we are told at this time, in October of this year. So we will know whether we are successful sometime in October of this year, as long as they hold to what they stated in the application process.
I was, again, a little curious about some of the values assigned. I'm looking at the May 21st letter from TPD, and they're showing here $1,000 as all they've accounted for the Ridge Pike retiming of a light. You, if I understood you right, you thought that that was not sufficient and there would be major improvement needed there if they indeed had to live up to their obligation and open the road.
That's
the way it was
correct.
originally. So how much are they really, I mean, $1,000 seems like a far cry from road improvement at that intersection.
That's correct. Theirs was the retiming. Ours was to provide additional capacity to reduce the queues, the excessive queues there if we're going to spend the money. Ours was in excess of around $800,000 to fix that intersection.
So the better part of another $1 million.
Excuse me?
So the better part of another $1 million.
That's correct.
So that, when you said that,
So part of the 1.7 million,
yeah,
that 800,000 was one component of that.
it was.
Another component of that was the park or the Shenandoah and Egypt Road intersection, and another component of that was the Trooper Shenandoah Boulevard of Generals improvement.
Okay, wasn't clear that way on here.
It
So-
wasn't listed that way, I understand, yes.
All right.
Sorry about that. The board's going to accept public comment on this application at this point, and then if it's inclined, it may vote on this tonight. So anybody that wants to offer public comment on this application only, please come up.
Before comment.
You want to do that?
It's not-
Okay. Well, go ahead.
I apologize for interrupting. If, at this time, we'd like to take a 5-minute recess, since we've been going for about 2 hours now, and stretch your legs, and then we'll be right back, and then we'll open it up to public comment. Thank you. Jesus, it is amazing.
Thanks.
I upped the report, I made it 71.
Okay, now we return to, back into the meeting. Sorry, I hear there was a line for the restroom, so maybe the applicant wants to donate some money so we can have facilities outside or something. Okay, John, we're ready to go. Okay, so we'll open it up to public comment. We'd appreciate it if you could come up to the microphone, state your name. We need your address for the record. If you could keep it brief, we would all like to, get home before midnight, but we appreciate your perseverance and patience to staying and listening. This is a very important issue, and we would like to hear your input on this. So one at a time, if you could just please come forward to the microphone.
Good evening. I'll try to keep this brief. My name is Preston Lutweiler. I live at 752 Mockingbird Lane. I've lived there for almost 30 years now. And I have to tell you, I like most of what I heard here this evening. That intersection at Crawford and Park in Eagleville is horrible. Probably the worst remaining intersection that I'm aware of anyway in the township. And I'm every time I go through that area, I just shake my head and say, how did this happen? One of the things that affects that intersection today is the closing of the Arcola Bridge. And I thought Chairwoman Ekman was almost getting to the question of, we had sort of a traffic study, involuntary traffic study with the closing of the Arcola Road Bridge. And it was a little unclear to me when I was hearing the numbers from Mr. Montgomery and Mr. Moore, whether the numbers reflected the closing of the Arcola Road Bridge, and whether maybe we actually have had an unintended experiment in traffic control on Park Avenue, where maybe we have already seen an extra 336 trips, which will not be there when that bridge is finally finished. So if, for the public, some idea of, the traffic here is going to be like it is today, but for a much longer period of time, because when Arcola Road Bridge opens up, if you open up Shenandoah Boulevard, you're going to have that additional traffic. It would have been nice to have clarification of whether the numbers that were being talked about included in any way or used in any way the unintended experiment that we've had with the closing of the Arcola Road Bridge. Similarly, there's a lot of work going on 422 now, and it would be nice to know whether the projections that are being made are projecting the future configuration of the 422 and Trooper Road interchange, and whether that's going to have any impact on what is being proposed or what might happen if Shenandoah Drive were completed. Mr. Montgomery was the first person in the discussion this evening to mention the stream, which is why that intersection at Crawford Road and Eagleville Road and Park Avenue is so messed up, because there's a bridge there. And the stream Mine Run, which is a tributary to the Perkiomen Creek, goes under Park Avenue right at that intersection, and Eagleville and Crawford have to be offset on either side of the stream. The proposal to fix this problem involves a very oblique crossing of Mine Run. And I'm a longtime member of the Perkiomen Watershed Conservancy. I'm very interested in water quality. And I think there's an opportunity here, when you get down to the details of the planning, to make sure that there's minimum impact on the stream with that oblique crossing on Crawford Road when it finally gets designed. And when you take a road like Shenandoah Boulevard and make it into an emergency access road, I've seen many places where they actually use pervious pavement. They don't make an impervious road in that case. If it's only going to be used for emergency vehicles, there's an opportunity there to minimize the impact of that crossing of Mine Run also. Last comment, Supervisor Thomas was getting a number of times the question of, obviously there are some avoided costs here that the applicant is going to get the benefit of. There's a great benefit to the community, I think, of fixing this intersection at Crawford and Eagleville and Park. All I can say is I hope you've struck the right balance and get the maximum and best project that you can from this trade. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes,
Sir.
please come forward.
I'm Ralph Wolfe. I have a unit down at Shenandoah. When I read this morning's Times Herald, my first reaction was being perplexed, because the way the article read, it just sounded like safety's up for sale, which obviously what I've heard tonight, it really isn't that issue. But I did have several questions that weren't certain were really answered. The first one is, the previous gentleman touched on it a little bit, but I never heard any idea of what additional traffic is going to be generated on Park Avenue when we correct this wicked intersection down there at Eagleville and Crawford. Was any projections, what is that going to do anything to Park Avenue, generate additional traffic or anything?
Casey? Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
There we go. You're talking about the realignment of Crawford with Eagle and Park. We do not expect that that will attract more traffic on Park Avenue. No. We think that what we're doing is we're facilitating the traffic that's there today in a much safer manner to flow through that intersection at a better rate and also in a safer condition.
I just wanted to check, because nothing had been mentioned about whether it was a zero or if traffic was added, and I think that should be quite obvious. Could be an issue if it was the other way around. Secondly, and this may sound goofy to some respect, but when you correct that intersection, which is, my daughter used to live up the road from there, so I traveled many, many times. Is there any consideration given to, especially when you come to a crossing, of some kind of pedestrian crossing or walkway or anything, instead of having people walk? There's not many, but you sure don't need them to walk out in the road if possible. You could do something.
The intersection's gonna, it doesn't have shoulders provided around that intersection today. So there'll be some safer pedestrian crossing at the intersection itself. In terms of like sidewalk and additional improvements up to those neighborhoods, that has not been contemplated due to the topography in this particular case, at least at this time. But with the improvement of the intersection, the township could create a vision potentially to look at that in the future.
I would think that if it's possible, that might be considered. If you're going to be doing some work in a little bridge, even though it might not be much, every little bit helps, rather than have a tight lane and somebody decides they want to go for a walk or jogging or something. So that was just one consideration. And then my final thought, obviously, with all those additional traffic that would be generated on Park because if Shenandoah became a public road, that in itself is an indictment of the traffic pattern. The only reason that would be getting that wanted extra traffic is people are frustrated with an Egypt and Trooper Road, which is a disaster many times. And again, if you're going to generate that much traffic just by making a public road, that means there's a problem that's going to get continuously worse. And somebody could argue, and I'm just throwing out, that, hey, if you took off that traffic, all this traffic on going into Park Avenue, that's going to help other parts of the township, whether it be Egypt or Trooper Road. And maybe if there's some consideration of the overall traffic problem, this would have helped Egypt and Trooper if it was a public road. Obviously, I'm not disagreeing with all the arguments why shouldn't be made a public road, but it still speaks of the fact there's a problem there. It's going to get a lot worse. In fact, Shenandoah is going to be more than 2.5 times the size it is right now. So some consideration should be given. How are we going to solve the problem that we know is going to get worse, whether it's from Shenandoah or the new shopping center down the road, or even what's going to happen when the Wawa's open up at Ridge and Trooper. It's going to get worse, and hope for some consideration be given to, hey, this is one opportunity that might have alleviated some of the traffic, and there might be legitimate reasons not to do it, but there must be some thought given to what can be done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Volpe. Okay, do we have any other? Yes, Mr. Comroe.
Mike Comroe, 205 Pinetown Road, Audubon. I think as the board knows, I'm a longtime resident of this township and also been a township planner for the past 22 years. I'm probably one of the 2 active planners who were involved in this plan going back 16 years ago. And I've got to admit, when the original plan came through, I was 100% for an open road, Shenandoah Boulevard being open to Park Avenue. But after the testimony and the studies and actually a site visit, I feel that it would be a big mistake to open that road to Park Avenue. I think it's going to cause a lot of impact to the people on Park Avenue. They're going to have difficulty even getting out of their driveways, which is the same thing I run to now on Pinetown Road. And a part of it is the bridge. But just to remind the board that when this came up before the Planning Commission, well, a month and a half ago, we were 100% in favor of considering this road a private road. And also, I use this intersection at Crawford in Eagleville quite frequently in the morning and in the afternoon, and I'll tell you, that road is a mess. I'm not going to go into my stories about my almost 10 years on the ambulance and with the calls I've had at that intersection, but I think we should strongly consider accepting the offer to correct that intersection and to keep this road private. And that's all I have to say, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Comroe. Any other comments?
William D. Brook, Jr., 4015 Bittersweet Circle. I also serve on the Planning Commission, and it was an unanimous vote to allow this road to stay private. The only concern I have is hearing tonight is some of the cost estimates. I heard the word 2011, some of these estimates were done. I'm concerned that we're in 2014. I'm also concerned that if this grant doesn't get approved by PennDOT this round, The costs are going to go up, and will be in October 2015. So I hope we address something in the request of the applicant that he cover that cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. And Casey, maybe you could explain the idea of when the construction could begin. You know, because right now, we have a condition where roads are closed in the township with the Arcola Road Bridge, and actually, we have some good news that those bids were let out today for that project, so that is good. But maybe you could shed some light on the time frame.
Sure. Hypothetically, if things work out, we won't have double detours, and nor would we want double detours in the township. If the Arcola Road Bridge stays on track the way they say it is, and that they did, like you said, the bids went out, the bridge will go under construction. That should be under construction and open to the public sometime the end of next year, 2015. Let's call it by end of year 2015. If we get the grant in October of this year, we can start the design, and it would not go to construction until spring of 2016. And then from 2016 for, let's say, 12 to 18 months, it would be open to traffic in 2017 in the fall to complete, all the improvements here. That's kind of a time frame. All that's kind of laid out in the grant application, I believe, that we did as well.
Okay.
So we're talking about Arcola Road will be done, open, area under relief. The 422 interchange improvements will be done, open. Traffic that now has to go back down Trooper, Shenandoah, and down Egypt to get onto 422 to go west from the business park will not have to do that. They can get on at the interchange, so that'll alleviate some traffic in that area as well. And then we'll go under construction in a phased process so that traffic can move through the intersection and doesn't have to be detoured in a major way.
Any other comments? Yes. Thank Casey.
Good evening. My name is Kelvin Carolina. I live at 900 Creeble Mill Road. The concern that I would have is that with the grant application process, once the grant is approved, assuming that it would be approved, and with the longevity in the construction start and finish, if there's a shortfall, can we be assured that the developer will cover all costs without coming back to the township asking for some additional funds?
Very good question. Yes, Bernadette.
And Mr. Montgomery could sort of address the first person's comment and Mr. Carolina's comments.
Excellent.
There were a couple quick questions that were technical in nature from the first gentleman. The Arcola Road traffic that was diverted was not included. Our counts are predate that diversion, so that answered that question. The estimates for the 363 interchange traffic were included. We took numbers from the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, some of their estimates. We tried our best to sort of assume who was going to use it, and we included that in our analysis to try to keep it as realistic as possible down the road. In terms of mine run, I'm a traffic engineer. I envisioned how this improvement would go. The DEP has a very big say on how that improvement is going to go. They did meet with us. They were in the field, and they're driving the car, so to speak, on how that is going to be done first, and then we'll make sure that the road component is safe and efficient. To address costs, it was brought up about the cost estimate. It was actually 2013 was the most latest and greatest estimate. It was a 2011 estimate that was updated to include for construction costs. The 2.3 million number, that gives us an additional $260,000 over what we've estimated the project cost, which has numerous conservative facets of it. The overall improvement cost per the submission we made was $5,060,000. Assuming the $3 million grant and the $2.3 million, we're looking at $240,000 over that is also able to be used towards that in case there are some overruns. I just wanted to make you aware of that.
Thank you. I think that does cover most of those questions. Any other public comment? Okay, hearing none. Board members have any further questions?
No questions,
At this time, then, I think the solicitor will go over some conditions that the board, if they wish, we could entertain a vote this evening if we're in agreement, if we'd like to do that.
Okay. Used to these mics up here. This is a modification of the existing 1998 conditional use decision, and the standard is, as was stated at the outset, conditions have changed. On that type of an approval over time, conditions change. The applicant has the right to come in and make this type of request. So what's in front of tonight is the request to redesignate the road from a public road to a private road. If the board's inclined to approve this, I prepared 5 conditions, and I'll just read these conditions for the record. Number 1, that the applicant establish financial security with the township to guarantee both the construction of Shenandoah Boulevard as a private road and the construction of related off-site traffic improvements in a total amount of $3 million. $2.3 million would be set aside and designated for the off-site improvements, and the financial security would be posted in a form and manner to be approved by the township solicitor. 2, that the off-site improvements would occur at Park Avenue, Eagleville Road, and Crawford Road intersection, and that the designated off-site improvement funds would be earmarked for that intersection by agreement with the township. Separate agreement from this decision. 3, that in the event that the foregoing off-site intersection cannot be fully funded, the township has the option of utilizing the off-site improvement funds for other road improvements and or intersection improvements as recommended by the township's traffic engineer. All other terms and conditions of the original 1998 conditional use decision in order shall remain in effect. And number 5, that the applicant would comply with all other required ordinances of Lower Providence Township unless modified during the land development process. There is another decision to be made on this other than the one tonight, and that is on the land development plan, which will come in front of the board next month. But they're the 5 conditions I'm offering up to the board for discussion and or vote.
Mr. Rice, the only other condition that I would want to see made part of that conditional use is that emergency vehicles, including the ambulance, the police officers, the firefighters, and I guess Public Works have access, unfettered access through that gate.
So police, fire, emergency services, public works would have, whether it's a fob or a key card or a code, and would have the ability to come and go as necessary for emergencies. So that would be number 6 to this decision. Is there anything else on this?
Okay, so with that, would someone like to entertain a motion to accept those 6 conditions to modify the conditional use agreement back from 1998?
I'd make a motion to modify the conditional use agreement from 1998 to redesignate Shenandoah Boulevard from a public to a private road, contingent upon Audubon land development meeting the 6 conditions identified by Mr. Rice.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second to that?
Second that?
Okay, motion and second. Any questions from the board?
Yeah, I just wanted to enter the comment. Excuse me, I apologize for my coughing fit earlier. 16 years ago, the applicant came before us and they wanted this project to go through and they dangled the road improvement in front of us, and 16 years later, it's still not done. And I'm very nervous. While I'm very much in favor of this motion and this project going forward, I'm very nervous that we're going to get a chunk of change and then something's going to happen and we're not going to end up with this road improvement. Yes, we're going to have a chunk of change in our pocket. I don't know what the resolution to that would be, whether there's a timing factor that we could place on this so that that project needs to be at least given a go by PennDOT. We need to get the grant or whatever before we finalize this. I don't know how you would word that. That's something for the attorney. But I'm nervous we're going down the same road again. And it seems like we've got all our ducks in a row, but they thought that 16 years ago when everybody was sure Shenandoah Boulevard would be open in a year or two. So I just want to lay that out there. I'm nervous. I think it's a great idea, but I think I have reason to be nervous.
Okay, any comments from the audience? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All those in favor, consent by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Motion carried. Thank you all very much for your patience, and I'd like to thank my fellow board members. This is almost 16 years of a long, drawn-out issue. None of us were on the board at that time, but we've certainly had a lot of public comment over the years about this issue, and we put a lot of effort into it, as well did our staff and our consultants. And hopefully we're on the way to finally having this resolved and this issue beyond and past us. So thank you very much. Okay, so we'll move on so we can all get out of here fairly quickly. We have item 3A, consideration of an agreement with the Methacton School District for a school resource officer based at the Arcola Intermediate School. Chief Carroll.
Thank you, Ms. Seckman. We're respectfully requesting that the board consider and enter into an agreement, approve an agreement with the Methacton School District to continue the school resource officer program that's based at the Arcola Intermediate School. That program's been in place since 2006. This particular agreement will extend the program through January 31st, 2017. And there's some language changes in the agreement that have been delineated in my memorandum of July 10th. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. But the intent is for this agreement to essentially mirror the agreement with the Methacton School District for the school resource officer that's based at Methacton High School. The key distinction between the two agreements is that the agreement before the board tonight provides for the school district providing 75% of the total cost of the officer, whereby the Methacton High School-based agreement provides for 100% of the cost being covered by the school district. And again, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Board members have any questions? Okay, so we'll call for, anybody like to make a motion to accept this agreement with the school district?
I make that motion.
Don, we have a motion, we have a second?
I would second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions? Questions from the, oh, sorry.
Yeah, just a comment. I've stated before that I am greatly in support of the school resource officer program, but given the fact that I am an administrator in the school district, I will abstain from the vote, and I have provided the township manager with a letter stating the same.
Thank you, Jason. Questions from the audience? Okay, hearing none, we'll call for this vote. All those in favor, consent by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? None?
One
Motion-
abstention.
And one abstention. Thank you, Jason. Motion carried. Thank you, Chief. A very successful initiative. We're glad to continue it. Okay, item 3B, consideration of amendment to the lease between the Lower Providence Township and the Lower Providence Community Center for 3323 Ridge Pike. And our solicitor will help us with that.
This is basically an amendment of the 2012 lease for the property out front here that's under construction. It's an extension of the completion date because of the work, which was delayed. It will extend the completion date up to February 1st, 2015.
Okay. Thank you, John. It's nice to see some progress happening out there, and the community center folks have been diligently and actively soliciting donations. So since we have a nice crowd, if anyone's interested in donating to the building fund, you could probably see Eileen right here. She would be more than happy to discuss it with you. So with that, could we have a motion for this amendment to the ambulance lease?
I'll make that motion.
Motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Questions from the board? Questions from the audience? Hearing none, we'll call for this vote. All those in favor, consent by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carried. Okay, item 3C, actually, we're going to be removing that from the agenda. I was told at the break that this issue has been taken care of. There's been some generous donors to take care of this permit, so there's no need to discuss it. Item 4, announcements. The library board will hold their regular meeting July 21st at 7 p.m. Planning Commission will hold their July meeting on the 23rd at 7 p.m. Zoning Hearing Board will have their meeting on July 24th at 7 p.m. And there will be a Red Cross blood drive July 30th here at the Township Building in this auditorium, 1 to 6 p.m. And our website has some more details if you're interested. I should ask you, Mike, is there some items of interest on the Planning Commission's agenda or the Zoning Hearing Board that you'd like to announce? Uh-oh, all the microphones are gone.
There will be some consideration of matters of the Cross Keys development, which had come briefly before the Planning Commission at the end of last month's meeting, and they'll be back in this month. At the Planning Commission, for the Zoning Hearing Board, there is one new hearing and one continued hearing. The continued hearing has to do with the Tabor proposal on Fifth Avenue. The new matter has to do with a new use for the building at 3301 Ridge, which would have to do with it's a prior professional office, doctor's office, and then would be going to a potential daycare use. And those are the highlights.
I'm sorry. I'm on item 5A. The Board of Supervisors is going to determine a date for a joint meeting of the Board and the Planning Commission. We've had some zoning change requests, and we'd like to discuss those ideas with the Planning Commission to see if we can come up with a joint initiative, I guess you could say, going forward, so that we're all in agreement as to whether we think some of these zoning changes that have been requested are a good idea or not. So we've decided the board will actually join the Planning Commission at their regular meeting. What did we say? What was the date? September, sorry, I wrote it down, but 30th?
September 24th.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, September 24th, then, will be a joint meeting between the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. So all those interested in attending, please come. Okay, courtesy to the floor, item 6, board members, things happening in the township?
The Mark Small Run is coming up. I believe it's on August 2nd in support of the Small Steps in Speech, so please consider supporting the Mark Small Run.
There was not a Parks and Rec Commission meeting in July because they took the month off. It's a regular scheduled holiday. However, I know Parks and Rec on July 4th, July 3rd, we had to cancel our celebration with the fireworks because of the weather. I can tell you that the board is looking into alternatives for that celebration. They're looking at other dates in the fall or the winter, or possibly making a bigger, larger event next year. All options are being discussed, and we are looking into that. Please make sure the residents that we haven't forgotten that, we promised fireworks, so we will follow through on our promise. There was a planning commission meeting held on Wednesday, June 25th, which was attended by Jill and myself. On the agenda was a request from Kimco, who owns the former Kmart / Gennardi's shopping center out here in Eagleville, on their text amendment to limit the number of parking spaces associated with the storage unit. The Planning Commission recommended approval, and it will come before the Board of Supervisors here at a later point. Also discussed was the Audubon Square 5 shopping center. Audubon Land Development proposed a hotel and 3 lunch restaurants, as well as some shopping. Traffic issues were discussed regarding the Wawa and access out on the Shenandoah Boulevard. The Planning Commission granted 12 waivers and requested Audubon Land Development to return for further discussions and review. Finally, as Mike mentioned, Cross Keys Development came before the Planning Commission to talk about a plan for a 10-lot subdevelopment up on Ridge Pike across from Austin Beverage, there next to the IBEW building. As Mike mentioned, they will be coming back to the next Planning Commission meeting to further discuss the plan.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, we'll open up to courtesy of the floor if the audience has anything they'd like to speak about. Yes, Mr. Baird, come on.
Very quick comment. Since you addressed it and Mike has spoken, you're going to come to the meeting. And the meeting is on the 23rd.
Ah, who gave me that date?
My concern was at our last meeting, like Mr. Duffy said, Cross Keys Road and Ridge Pike, they want to put a 10-lot development there. And the Planning Commission had spent over a year working on revitalization of Ridge Pike. And we had turned it over to the supervisors. I guess you're aware of that. When Mike was here, he was supposed to do some legal work on it, and we never heard anything back. And myself, I'm sure some of the other planning commissioners were wondering what happened with it, why nothing was done. Now they're going to put a 10-lot development on Cross Keys Road, and we went through a lot of work, spent a lot of hours doing the revitalization. So I just hope that comes up.
Right, that's definitely why we want to all sit down and talk together, so that we can all be on the same page and use all that work that was over a year or more that the Planning Commission put into that set of documents, and so we'd like to.
Ted, unless you moved your meeting to Tuesday, it's Wednesday, September the 24th.
Today, this is July, isn't it?
Well, they're talking September.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm talking, this meeting is when they're coming up to Cross Keys Road.
Okay.
And this is what I was concerned about. Before they get through all this work, if we can implement what we put in motion, before it was wasted.
Well,
Because it's a big piece of property. There's 7 acres of ground there.
Right.
And could be utilized. We actually have different buildings on there, what we drew up, put a bus for on it. for that section.
Mr. Barrett, I can tell you that the board has been presented with numerous proposals for the Collegeville property, the Superior 2 property, and this is why we want to meet, is because we don't know how to progress with all of the proposals that we've had, and we want to sit down and talk with the Planning Commission and figure it out before we, give approval to anything, to figure out how they're all going to play together. And that's the main reason we want to meet with you and talk about it and go over all the hard work that you guys put into it.
Right, yeah, there was something else I heard they're gonna put, high-density housing on Germantown Pike?
There are
That was-
multiple proposals.
That there are multiple
Yeah.
proposals for that, area up there at Collegeville, and we want to discuss them all. Make sure that we're doing the right thing by all of the residents and all of the property owners.
Yeah, I love housing, but I think, we gotta put some industry there, something that's gonna be more pliable, like maybe a medical center or something. That would be great.
That would be wonderful.
Well, the good thing is we are starting to see some activity, so we are, getting some bites of planning. Yes, Mike?
I just want to speak to something that's happened in the last couple of weeks. We've been trying to revitalize this. There's 4 developers that Mr. Duffy mentioned just in the time that I've been here that are up in that area, and we're speaking to them as a group to see how we can coordinate it with the help of Sean Metrick from the County Planning Commission to kind of get it organized so that we have something that when we do meet as a joint Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors, we have something to really kind of dig into and not kind of go backwards on all the work that's already been done.
Excellent.
And Sean Metrick has agreed to do all that work under his existing contract without any additional expense.
He's a great guy.
Even better.
Even better.
Okay, any other public comments?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Bill.
I think Mr. Beer's concern is, we're gonna have a meeting this month with Cross Keys. And we asked him at the last meeting, would you please look at the business district plan?
Mm-hmm.
And he kinda said the property owner wants to put his mother on that first parcel. So I don't think there was any entertaining of thinking about the plan that we envisioned there at this point. So I think Mr. Beer's concern was, what do we do with our meeting this month if we're not gonna meet till September?
Sure, understandable. Mike?
Well, I can say, Mr. Brooks, when I met with the people from Cross Keys when they came in the staff solicitor meeting, I told them about the proposal that Mike just talked about and asked them to meet with all of the other developers and to come up with a plan. They didn't seem too keen on participating in that because they didn't see them. But the Board of Supervisors will certainly, before we take any action on their plan and their request, we will have met with the planner. We'll met with all the developers, and we'll talk to them and gone with the Planning Commission and their recommendation. And however you guys see to handle the recommendation on their proposal, I mean, you're going to handle that, and we'll take all that information into account when we meet in the future.
And just in brief, again, it's the hour's late. I just, it's only at a sketch plan stage yet, so it's early in terms of the what's coming forth next week.
Great. Okay. Okay, any other? You have to come forward, Mr. Nielsen.
I just wanted to publicly thank the Board of Supervisors, Planning Commission, all the staff for many meetings, many favorable cooperation, Mr. Gestrick, assembling many meetings to get that issue with the road resolved there for 16 years, and your favorable reconsideration is very much appreciated. Look forward to many more favorable, positive developments in the township. And Don, thank you for your support too. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good evening, Mrs. Holt.
Yes, my name is Jean Holt. I'm a resident of Shannondale, and I also have a business property in the township called Mobiles. I haven't been to a meeting for some time, and I just have a housekeeping suggestion.
Sure.
That you provide a table alongside this podium for the attorneys and people that are
Absolutely.
speaking.
Yes.
Rather than having documents sitting on a chair and everybody wondering, are they going to fall off? I just think it would be a nice thing.
You're
Another
absolutely
thing about
correct.
housekeeping, township housekeeping. I know we have a lot of road repairs. I haven't seen too much activity yet. But one thing I think should be considered is painting of lines on the roads. They are almost invisible in many places, and that is a safety issue. And I think that should be done whether or not the roads are repaired or not, because that is something so important to drivers in the township.
Thank you. Our Public Works Director's here, and I'm sure he has a schedule when he does that, so we appreciate your comments, Mrs. Holt. Okay, any other comments?
We missed one.
Okay, the clock's ticking,
There is a
Rich.
finance committee meeting of the full finance committee on July the 28th at 6 PM here in this auditorium.
Excellent. We're looking forward to those results from that meeting. Good news coming out of that committee. Okay. All right, let's call for adjournment. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion.
A second?
Second.
All those in favor, consent by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Thank you all for coming. Have a good evening. All right, we're not meeting.